And so I have been more aware in the past year than ever before of the precarious position that a lot of teachers of psychology are placed in when they're trying to talk about the human condition and literally being targeted for saying the wrong thing or too much or too little by their students, by their administrators, by the government. And so that was also on my mind because it's been on my mind all year.
You just heard Lisa Diamond from the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. Garth interviewed Lisa for episode 252 of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff.
As a listener of this podcast, you're already passionate about psychology, and Sage College Publishing helps you bring that passion into the classroom. Sage is an independent publisher focused on the social sciences. Beyond leading psychology research journals, Sage has deep roots in the discipline and offers textbooks across the entire major, from intro psych to brain and behavior, and from child development to research methods. Sage also offers Vantage, an intuitive learning platform recommended by 9 out of 10 instructors who have used it. It integrates with your LMS, it's easy to set up, simple to use, so that you can focus on teaching, not troubleshooting. So check out what Sage College Publishing has to offer at psychsessions.org/sage and let them be your partner in teaching the science of being human.
Hi, my name is Drew Christopher. I joined STP back in 1996 because I just wanted to be a better teacher, and I figured something called the Society for the Teaching of Psychology would help me in that regard, and it did. I became involved in a variety of task force, a variety of working groups, and so forth early on in my career. And looking back on it now, I think one of the biggest benefits wasn't just becoming a better teacher, but all the colleagues that I met along the way, and I'm still friends with today, who are also helping me still be a good teacher, if not a great teacher. Those professional connections have lasted a lifetime, and both personally and professionally, they're probably one of the most rewarding things that I can look back on the over 30 years I've been teaching and say it's probably the best thing I've ever done.
To join the Society for the Teaching of Psychology for only $35 a year, please visit teachpsych.org. APA Publishing wants to give you 15% off your order. If you teach classes like counseling, clinical psychopathology, or multicultural psychology, then this is for you. APA Publishing has books that are written by experts that are grounded in evidence and really help teachers. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a book they have right now called Helping Skills. It's in its 6th edition, and it gives students clear, practical frameworks for understanding and learning counseling techniques. It's perfect for hands-on practice and skill development. Here's another one. Cultural Humility helps students build self-awareness and engage meaningfully across diverse identities and experiences. So head to apa.org because they want to give you 15% off your order today using code PS15. That's capital P, capital S, 15. Go check out APA Publishing.
Hi, folks. This is Garth, and this is one of my favorite things to do, actually, is when somebody has given a talk at a conference to have like my private Q&A with them afterwards. So, folks, I think you're going to get something that is really beneficial, not only to your own kind of interest and understanding, but also for your students. And I'm here today with Dr. Lisa Diamond, who is at the University of Utah, and you're going to have to help me. Your title over there is Distinguished
Professor of Psychology and Gender Studies.
Correct. Yes, that's what you told me, and I couldn't remember. So anyway, welcome to the Psych Sessions podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So your talk today, one of the things I just want to tell you that I loved about it was sometimes I operate a conference right now and have for a little while. And sometimes when you tell people who are obviously really good at research and writing, and you ask them to give a talk and you say, it's for teachers. Sometimes you don't get that teacher-centric talk. And but I really appreciate how you approach that. Do you approach most of your talks that way, or did you do this for teachers specifically?
It's a really good question. But I think part of the nature of my field, which is like sexuality and gender, is that it is of such, like, not the average person on the street maybe doesn't give a flying fig about the details of cognitive neuroscience, but most people are interested in their own gender and sexuality. And so I think I have always adopted the approach of trying to present my work in ways that like anybody could kind of understand it. But I also think that, at least for today and for this talk, given the recent attacks on higher ed, it's really teachers who are kind of bearing the brunt of a lot of these kind of the cultural confusion. What are you allowed to say? What are you not allowed to say? How do you talk about something that's controversial? There are, I see cases all the time. Folks will send me, TikToks of students recording their own professors to try to get them in trouble for saying about something. And so I have been more aware in the past year than ever before of the precarious position that a lot of teachers of psychology are placed in when they're trying to talk about the human condition and literally being targeted for saying the wrong thing or too much or too little by their students, by their administrators, by the government. And so that was also on my mind because it's been on my mind all year.
Yeah.
It's what I'm kind of facing myself. In 3 days, I'll be in front of, my own seminar on gender and sexual diversity. And last year in Utah, there was the assassination of Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University, which created a lot of there's just a lot of anxiety in Utah. And I am actually changing the room that I'm teaching in and not putting the actual room number, in public information because it's now become like I am now concerned about the safety of my own students in a way, because it's like, a class on sexual, where do you want to find the queer and trans students? Over there.
Interesting.
And so I have never in my life had to do that. And certainly after the assassination, some of my family members reached out to me and they were like, you should teach that class online. You should not. I said, no way. No way. They already eliminated, at least at the University of Utah, because of the anti-DEI law, we eliminated the LGBTQ Resource Center, the Women's Resource Center, the Center for Equity and Student Belonging, the Black Cultural Center. They all became illegal under the law that was passed. And so I'm like, the only gathering places that marginalized students have left are classrooms. But isn't that fantastic, right? Isn't that really like that's why colleges and universities are always kind of center points for cultural change, because the process of sitting together in a room with other individuals and thinking hard is just the essence of everything and every social movement. And so I have been very aware of, how do I teach about these topics now? It's been on my mind all year. And so it was relatively easy for me to be like, hey, you guys, are you struggling with that too? It's okay. We're all going to get through this.
I don't know if you felt it in the room, but I think people are a little desperate for somebody like you. I mean, this is just the perfect timing for somebody like you to come to a conference like NITOP and speak to us. It's like a lifeline. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of teachers out there who are not experts on sexuality and gender like you are, who haven't written about it, who are just trying, they know that there's something to teach.
They're not sure how far to go.
Absolutely.
And they're not sure what's right. And so a part of it is the permission structure of, you know what, we experts we're not so confident what we thought either.
Yeah.
So if you're confused, that's okay. that means you're actually doing it right. And it's interesting, when I call the talk, your textbook is out of date. And one of the things I mentioned was every textbook is out of date as soon as it's written. That's a part of just the way the field operates. However, I don't think we always necessarily do a good job of communicating that to students. We say, here's the textbook, as if this tome is some, and maybe it is for some things, like if you're, studying anatomy, that stuff is pretty well known. But for my discipline, it's a young discipline. It hasn't existed that long. And so the very confident phrasing of a lot of textbooks, what is known now is, and a part of me is just like, oh, how cute, and yet that phrasing, that kind of tone communicates to students, oh, people know everything there is to know about this because it's said on this page in a beautiful glossy page. And to just sort of crack that notion and say the beauty and the excitement of being kind of a social scientist studying, sex, gender, and race is that we are quickly realizing that we're not done learning. There's just so many things that we are still learning, and textbooks do a terrible job of communicating that to students. They're just like, oh, here's where the knowledge is. And it's like, wow, this is a discipline where everything we thought was true 10 years ago, we're not so sure about that anymore.
It makes me think about this this theme that a group of folks put out for intro psych, but I think it's true generally for psychology. And I think you spoke to this, and it is that psychology is a science and adapts as new data develop. But we sometimes forget that. And one of the things that I felt like there was just a through line in your talk of reminding us that we are social scientists, and there is a way that we ask questions and test things. And now you are actually offering a way to look back at the way things were measured and researched and the questions that were asked for. Maybe you could just speak to, in your field, how has this happened over time and where are we now?
Yeah, it's such a great entryway, I think, for students of psychology because, as I mentioned, the question of what kinds of humans are there and why is one of the oldest questions in psychology. And we can kind of laugh at phrenology, like, oh, maybe people with different size heads. And we say, oh, how interesting that people thought that was how you could categorize individuals. But I think if you look at the way our categories and our ways of understanding sexuality and gender have evolved over the years, from just counting people to looking at behavior to looking at hormones to looking at genetics, you see the same sort of kind of, stumbling ahead, method by method. And so when we judge how ridiculous the methods of the past were, we have to keep in mind, well, we're just as flawed and we're just as limited. We may be better along, but in 30 years, they're going to look back on how we studied things and be like, oh, how cute. All of those little surveys that you did, like how adorable. And so to just put that in context and say, the process of being a social scientist is trying to figure out, and especially being a psychologist, trying to get inside of the people's heads. Boom, that's a problem right there. If you look at how different programs of psychology over the years, there were a lot of departments that weren't considered psychology. They were called like behavioral science. Well, behavior's a lot easier to follow. It's like, oh, I can count behavior. But the line between behavioral science and psychology is like, well, what is motivating the behavior? Something in your head. Well, then how do we get in there? And the impossibility of getting inside one another's heads is like the central drama in psychology throughout the whole history of the discipline. And even now, it's like, oh, fMRI, PET, all these brain scans, we still can't do it. We still cannot get inside one another's heads. And so we use every measure at our disposal. We're never grabbing the elephant. We're just always shifting lenses, one by one. But becoming aware of that, I think, makes you a better thinker. Instead of just saying, well, what do the genetics say? And then you're like, oh, wow. If you actually look at the genetics, it's so complicated that you then have to twist your brain into whole new ways of wrestling with things. So that this sort of pat idea of, oh, science is just a window. It's just like a microscope. No, it's not. None of our lenses work. And you have to be multidisciplinary. And I think it's also a great way to teach about kind of disciplinary boundaries, that anthropology has a different perspective on human gender and sexuality than psychology. And epidemiology has a different perspective, and sociologists have a different perspective. They're all kind of circling together. They're all trying to understand the same thing. And so what is the difference between like a psychologist and a geneticist and a sociologist? So there's just so many questions, new, interesting questions, I think, that arise for students. If you make it clear that when you've got a messy phenomenon that's trapped inside another human's head, well, what the heck are you going to, how are you going to get that?
Yeah. For those of us who are going into the classroom and we are using a textbook to teach, and obviously we're having this insight about just how to think about a messy topic like this. What can you offer right now? Like, what are the most important things for people who can speak about it? Because some don't have that privilege right now. But for people who can speak about it, what do their students need to know? What do they need to know? Because I think we're actually talking to professors and teachers as much as students right now.
Yeah. I think probably the biggest one is that human categories, when we start dividing folks into boxes, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, whether it's disability or mental ability, humans cannot resist making categories. The human brain is sort of a category-seeking missile. And yet every single one of them is flawed and weird because humans just aren't very categorical. Human behavior is necessarily complex. It's necessarily a spectrum. You can just see this in the history of so many disciplines. Oh, we used to think autism was a condition. No, it's a spectrum. We used to think this, like, what about race? Well, you have like mixed, right? Every time we think there are categorical boundaries, then in another couple of years, we're like, well, it's not a great category. Humans are made of continua. Humans are made of spectra. That's just how our species is. We don't have very many, we're kind of seduced by like, well, there's eye color, and like, oh, aren't there things that are just one way or the other? And so we fixate on some of those things and then we over apply that. And so I think the one thing to remember is that the process of making and breaking categories is a human process. We're addicted to it. We'll never stop. And we have to do it to make sense of the world, but we have to do it with some skepticism in the back of our mind, knowing, okay, I'm drawing this category because it's useful, because it's a shortcut, it's a heuristic, but don't invest too much in it. And for goodness sake, do not make the mistake of thinking that you are carving nature by its joints. When you take your little perception and you say, well, those people seem to be different from the next group, we're only seeing stuff on the surface. We are always missing stuff. Yeah. And so it makes it easier to talk about the complexity because you're like, hey, we're not talking about real groups that exist. We don't know which real groups exist. We are using terms and categories and groups as ways of chunking the complexity of the world so we can try to understand it, but it's a temporary chunking. It's just to get us through the question. Let's not fall in love with the categories. Let's not, be overconfident in our category. We have to do it. It's just what we do. But let's do it with a light touch and not be too committed to it.
Speaking of categories, you talked about how in early research, some categories just got left out, which had major implications for how we understood those categories.
Yeah.
So here's my softball to you. Can you just tell people about kind of where we came from with some of these different categories?
Yeah,
and where we're now?
and I talked a little bit about this in the talk. Originally when the first sort of physicians started to look at this phenomenon of some people are having sex with the same sex instead of the other sex, that was the only kind of distinction that mattered. Are you, and those folks never asked what people wanted to do. They didn't really care what folks fantasized about. They only cared about what people did, and this idea of an identity wasn't even a thing. And so they really viewed, the main distinction as being sort of distorted or abnormal and normal. So there was one category. You're normal, and if you're not normal, you're like inverted or sick or twisted. And so that was really in the 1800s. And then by the time we got to the 1900s, we have categories like homosexual, which start to be those terms start to get used. And again, you've got one category boundary. And then things start to get more complicated around like the 50s and 60s when we had this kind of gay category. And that was around the time that then we had sort of this liberal humanistic trend within psychology to sort of respect other people's autonomy. So then you start seeing people talk about lesbians and gays. So then we have two types. At least we bring gender in. At least women are in the mix. No recognition of bisexuality, of anything other than these categories of like some people always only want the same sex and other people don't. And so you've got those two categories. And that was true pretty much until like the 90s. And when I entered the field in the 90s, there weren't even that many studies, on gay people. And when they would have bisexual people in their sample, they would take them out, or they would just say, oh, we thought these people might be in transition. They might be confused. We didn't know what they were because, that doesn't seem like it's a thing. And to some degree, that bias still exists. There are still members, even of the queer community, who are like, oh, I don't know about bisexuals. I don't really trust them. I mean, we don't like messy categories. We don't like both and. Like, we just get kind of upset about that. So at that time, we were only studying folks who were exclusively identified as gay or lesbian and assuming that, well, there weren't that many folks in that bisexual group. We don't know what they are, so let's just ignore them. Well, it turned out we were actually ignoring the majority. The majority of the LGBTQ spectrum is comprised of individuals who have mixed patterns of attraction. Even if they strongly lean in one direction or another, like mostly but not completely gay or mostly but not completely het, there are more folks who have attractions to both genders than folks who have only attractions to the same gender.
I saw the data you put up. I mean, it was significant.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning. And we didn't used to have these data. Like, we didn't have the large-scale data to really look at until around, I'd say, like 2006, 2007. And I started to see that data coming out of the National Survey of Family Growth. And I was like, whoa, we messed up. We got this wrong. And one of the implications of that is that a lot of folks who, now will openly identify as bisexual didn't think that they even counted. They were like, well, there's something wrong with me. And when I started to do my first studies, I would have people in my sample who would say, well, maybe you shouldn't have me in your study. I don't think I'm a very good example of like a gay person because, and I was like, oh, you and everybody else. Everybody is a bad example because it's actually a pretty complex, phenomenon. Same thing with non-binary. The phrase non-binary, because you can do a Google Trends analysis and see when certain words kind of pop up. Non-binary doesn't really kind of pop into the culture until around 2010. And then it takes off, right? So a whole bunch of folks, and now there are more folks who identify as non-binary than kind of binary trans. And that, I think, stunned, a lot of us in the field. But it's because once you make a category available, a whole bunch of hidden folks were like, oh my God, now that there's a word for that. Oh. And so it just shows that the way we draw these boundaries so completely has the potential to either distort or expand our way of thinking about what is a normal, behavior? What is a normal experience?
It sounds
and
like
what are we missing now that we don't even know?
Right. Yeah. It sounds like the categories are not helpful in some ways because they're always going to be lacking.
Yeah.
But they are very helpful to some people who need to find themselves in a category.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I say all the time that, we need to make a distinction between identity categories that are personally meaningful and scientific categories. That, that by saying, wow, sexuality is not fundamentally categorical, is not saying, oh, your identity as a queer person doesn't mean anything. It's saying that's your social position. That's how you locate yourself on the spectrum. That's your way of understanding yourself as a person in the world. But that is very different from a scientist trying to say, what is the fundamental difference between group A and group B? Because different people who adopt the same label will do so for different reasons. There are individuals who adopt the label bisexual, and there are individuals who are like, well, I have bisexual attractions, but I don't like that term. I don't like the way it focuses on two sexes. I prefer to think of my experience of that as pansexual rather than bisexual, because that makes clear that I'm not assuming that gender is binary. And so you've got two people with the same pattern of attraction. One of them feels more comfortable with an identity label of pan. The other one might feel more comfortable with an identity label of bi. That has to do with how they personally experience their own position in the world, not with some kind of technical scientific thing. And I think we need to always kind of be aware of the fact that humans are trying to understand themselves through these categories and trying to represent them to others. Those are very different purposes than the scientific method. They deserve just as much respect. But we just have to know that we're not talking about the same thing.
Now, you live in two worlds, right? Because you are a researcher, but also you deal with students who I'm sure you have conversations with who want that validation or want to have language to understand themselves. How do you bridge that gap? Yeah, that's my question.
That's a great question, because I also think there's a developmental component to it. When you're talking about college students who are identifying as somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum, they're often relatively recently identified, right? They may have only become aware of that past 3, 4, maybe 5 years. Well, one of the things we know from a lot of this longitudinal research is that folks are usually most concerned and preoccupied with categories in that early stage of identification, because they're still kind of figuring out. It's like they've woken up like, oh my gosh, this is a thing you can be. And so it makes a lot of sense that at that kind of developmentally early stage in their own sexual trajectory, their focus on the category is really pronounced. And what you find is that as queer people go through their lives, they're usually more likely to be like, whatever. All I care about is that I'm able to live my life the way I want. And that I know how to communicate. I'm not going to obsess about whether you call it X or Y. And that really comes from having a longer life experience as a queer person. And so a part of what's difficult is that I don't want to be patronizing and say oh, you're young, you're obsessed with your identity. Isn't that wonderful? But I'm a developmental psychologist. That's my training. And so a part of it is developmental. It's the same thing we find in adolescents. Adolescents are very preoccupied with identity, and they're very egocentric. That's a part of adolescent brain development. And that's pretty much true until you're 25. And so a part of it is being able to sort of speak to this kind of intellectually, while also acknowledging that there is a developmental component to it. They will be more kind of possessive of their identities. And what I just try to kind of communicate is that is the sort of complexity of being in the midst of a social movement and ever-changing social movement and a political reality at the same time you're trying to sort of study something scientifically. There is no way that those things don't influence, one another. And so one of the reasons to, from the beginning of the gay rights movement, it's like, come out and claim your identity so that people know how many of us there are, right? So there's also a political weight to choosing and speaking an identity. And so I just try to make clear, look at all these things we're making these identities do for us. They're serving personal functions. They're serving social functions. They're serving political functions. It's okay. Like, it's okay for them to be doing all this different work. Let's just keep that in mind. Those are all valid reasons. Let's just not get attached to any one of them and realize that the personal attachment is just one of many things that identities are doing. And through your life, you're going to toggle between them. Sometimes you'll emphasize the political component. Sometimes you'll emphasize the personal component. That's all well and good. Just step back a little bit and see it within this kind of larger kind of pattern.
Are you okay talking about politics, or is that something that you shy away from? Well,
I kind of, here's the way I feel about it now. It used to be in the old days, we're like, oh, don't talk about the politics in the classroom. There's no way not to. It's in.
Okay.
I mean, the nature of this moment is that it is impossible to be a scientist or a scholar right now and have politics not affect what you do. If you just look at how the infrastructure of science is being kind of changed. So those are just realities. You don't even have to talk about the content of the political debates. There are structural changes happening to the way universities operate, to the way the discipline of science operates. We have to talk about it because it makes visible the fact that science and universities didn't just come out of nowhere. They are historically bounded. The ability to speak at a university about any topic, that didn't exist eternally. That's located in historic time too. And you can look at the sort of attacks on higher ed that are going on right now and just say, well, that is a part of the history of higher education. And so if you are standing up in front of any classroom, it's good to have everybody be aware of what that even means. Like, we didn't always do that. This idea of higher education as a place where we transmit knowledge, well, that is right now being debated pretty heavily. And so instead of saying, political attacks on higher ed, say, well, that has a history, so teach the history. Like, you can teach about the politics as long as you ground it in the history of how knowledge is communicated in nations. The United States has a certain infrastructure of universities, teaching, research that is not like infrastructures in other countries. Like, there's a reason that the US dominates science. We have a very particular infrastructure for science and education that is different from what you see in Eastern Europe and China and all these different countries. So the way to sort of do it safely is, I think, to say, let's be clear about what we are doing here in America, right? Like, ground it in history and culture instead of being like, universities have always existed. No, they have their own history too. So we're at a particular historical moment, and it's the outcome of everything that happened before, and we don't know where it's going. And so it's not so much teaching it as politics, it's teaching it as history. We're living through history right now.
Interesting. But you must have an opinion on why the political right is coming so hard at these particular issues right now. I think they would say probably that the maybe political left just got a little unhinged or something like that. But how do you see this interplay between, most people I think are pretty centric would be my guess, but we have these sides.
And that's why I think there's no way to understand this moment without looking hard at social media and the technological changes in information exchange that were created. I don't think anyone realized when Facebook started and when folks started spending all this time online, I don't think we fully understood how cult psychology operates. And I've thought a lot about this because I live in Utah, where there's a lot of debate, about whether the Mormon church is a church or whether it's a cult. And a lot of that debate has to do with information. That one of the things we know about cults is they tend to restrict the information of their members. And so a lot of the folks who have this debate, at least with respect to Mormonism, are like, well, the issue is not any sort of set of beliefs, but do you allow members of a certain group to know things that challenge those beliefs, or do you only allow them to hear information that supports what they already believe? There's a long literature on this sort of stuff, whether you call it brainwashing, whether you call it cults, whether you call it indoctrination. One of the things we know about human brains is that if you restrict information, if you close the doors and windows around what they know, it starts to distort how people process information. These are well-established mechanisms. So you don't need to call anything a cult or this or that. You just have to understand that closing the doors of information can have really distorting effects on the way people process things. But that is what the algorithms have started to do. The YouTube algorithms, the Facebook algorithms, now we know that, they're not feeding you a bunch of information randomly. They're using what you just watched and saying, okay, what did other people who watched that want to watch? And they are giving you narrower and narrower and narrower slices. And that would be fine if that information was competing with everything else in the information marketplace. But now we know it's not. So we are a centrist and pluralistic society. We have made ourselves less so on both sides. Everyone is becoming more of something because they're closing the windows and doors through their kind of consumption of algorithmically presented media. And I don't think anyone realized what a significant effect that this would have on our culture. But now the cat's like out of the bag. This technology is out there. They've done these experiments where they put bots into the algorithm and you can turn a neutral bot into a Nazi in 2 days. So that is a part of what is happening in this moment, that it's not just a rational response to extremes. We're not thinking the same way. You kind of have to understand a little bit about psychology to understand why we're in this moment. We have changed the way we process information, and we now no longer believe that there's any real arbiter. When I grew up, if it was on the news at 8:00 at night, it was real.
Yeah.
Or if it was printed in a newspaper, that meant it was true.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
That's gone. And so that allows the extremes to get more extreme. And so I think in many ways, the crisis we're in right now is partly technologically kind of mediated. And that freaks me out because I do not know how we kind of fight against that. I'm someone who's not really on social media. I kind of was too old to kind of get into it. But I see my students, consuming it, and it activates all of our kind of our dopamine. It's interesting, it's fast, it's short, all of our attention. And so part of this moment is that we have made ourselves more extreme by constricting a limited range of information. And so then you can have two people who they do not have the same version of reality. And so where do you even have any sort of meaningful dialogue when one of them is like, oh my God, I can't believe that you still think that gender is binary. And the other person's like, I can't believe that you think it's not. And where do you begin? Because they're not consuming the same information. And that I find truly kind of daunting.
Well, I think you've shown us a way in the classroom to really get back to education about what science is and what psychological science is. I imagine, no, I don't mean sidestep, but it's the best word I can come up with right now, that you can come at a lot of these questions that even your students have in the classroom in a third way. Mm-hmm. Using that lens of psychological science and just educating you. I mean, you really displayed that in a lovely way in your talk. there was this one moment, I think close to the beginning of your talk, where you said you like to ask people where they feel uncomfortable. Can you say a little bit about that?
I think in many ways, people talk about the classroom as a safe space and you don't want to make your students uncomfortable. And I say, oh, yes, you do. You do want to make your students uncomfortable, because the truth is that our reactions, our emotional reactions to information always exist. If you're reading the newspaper and you're reading something about some political action and you're having a response, that response is changing the way you interpret the information. Like, we can't help that. We're humans. That's just what we do. But we don't like to admit that. We like to believe that we are rational knowers, and we're not. Like, we know that we're not. And the best way to sort of find that out is for you to capture it in the moment that's happening. That the moment that some part of you is like, 12% of the population is now LGBTQ. And like, you'd have some parents be like, okay, it's like, stop right there. Stop right there. What was that? What just happened? That reaction shows you that you're invested. Some part of your brain is invested because you had that reaction. That's not bad. Just grab onto that and say, oh, okay. So how might that be changing what I see? I think the only way to sort of deal with it is for folks to actually call their own attention to it, and to make it clear that your goal is not to eliminate the bias. Your goal is to call it up and see if you can disrupt it a little bit. Just shake it. Like, this idea of like, oh, my goal is unbiased. Nothing is unbiased. Go ahead. Have the bias. Own it. But then actively push at it. See if you can, kind of make it a little bit messier. And I think the best way to do that with psychology is with empathy. Because if there's one thing that successfully disrupts some of that discomfort, it's our natural, human instinct. When we listen to another human being that is communicating emotions, we can't help but to sort of experience their humanness. And so often I find that the way to cut through when students are making really kind of totalizing, globalizing views of one another, MAGA supporters, queer people, whatever, is to slow them down and see if I can find them a link or a video where someone's just talking about their life experience. Like, every MAGA supporter has their own set of fears and concerns and worries. And if you understand their views about sex and gender from a lens of their humanness, what it feels like to be someone growing up where everything that you thought was true growing up doesn't seem to be true anymore, how scary that might feel, how destabilizing that might feel, especially if you're also economically insecure. Like, what are the human things that shape how we experience information and what we think of it? And so I think that disrupting folks' biases and then putting them in circumstances to reconnect with their basic human empathy, I think is one kind of way through the morass.
Do you get passionate, angry? Do you kind of cross that line into like our current? I know that your funding has been cut because of the government laws that have changed this year, but also just seeing, I don't know, the hate on both sides, on one side. How do you deal with that? Like, do you see yourself as like an agent of change or as a researcher who's doing the work, or both?
It's a great question. I think, and that's really changed for me over the years, because I do think that probably up until 2016, Trump's first election, I had the same sort of assumption that I think a lot of people had, which is the world just gets gradually more knowledgeable about diversity, more accepting, that we're just on this trajectory upward, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the queer, like, look, the world is just an upward escalator. And the kind of backlash and reversal that we're seeing now, I could not have imagined. It did not exist as a possibility. And so Trump's election in 2016 was the first sort of chink in that. But at that time, a lot of us were like, oh, well, it was a fluke. If only Hillary Clinton had gone to Wisconsin. And now we realize, oh, no, it was not a fluke. There was actually larger changes, political changes afoot and technological changes that we didn't even know about the Russia influence campaign, for years after that, and the way that they, used Facebook to change people's minds. So now that I am it's like, the sunglasses are off. The world is a way different place than we thought it was, which means that I can no longer take for granted that, oh yeah, there's always some hatred, but everything's going to be okay in the end, which is kind of the naive view that I think a lot of us had. That no longer seems to be true to me. And the other thing is that if you just look, and it's fresh on my mind because I'm writing a paper about this right now. So I sort of had to sit down where I'm reviewing all of the published research on how structural stigma, how laws and policies that restrict the lives and well-being and healthcare of queer and trans individuals have downstream effects for their mental and physical health. And there's now a huge literature on that because we've been doing a bunch of mini experiments in all 50 states that a law will get passed and you can actually track how life for queer people living in a certain state changes after certain laws and policies, are put into place. So we've had a bunch of literature on that for the past, more than a decade. But there is no precedent for what has happened in 2025. There is no precedent for the sweeping set of federal policies across all three branches of government, the speed with which they went into place. I started compiling them into a table, and the table is 14 pages long. So this is not just a gradual, this is not people say the pendulum is swinging. I'm I hate those pendulum analogies because those pendulum swinging were before social media and before the algorithms. The algorithms have messed up any kind of natural swinging. The pendulums are no longer swinging free. We're just in a different era. And if you look at that and you look at just the number of policies that have been passed, we're in imminent danger. Certain populations right now are in imminent danger and are being, attacked in a sort of institutionalized way that we've never quite seen sort of in the modern era. So I find it impossible kind of not to at least be straightforward about what is actually happening. You don't even have to have an opinion about it. You could just look at that list and say, something is happening that is unprecedented, and it's targeted at a certain group of individuals. If you look at, Supreme Court decisions, related to LGBTQ rights and related to actually the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, one thing you see over and over again is that the Supreme Court's been pretty clear that hatred for a particular individual or a religion or a lifestyle, hatred, animus, in technical terms, is not a constitutional basis for treating people differently. You can have a rational basis. You can be like, oh, people shouldn't have this job because, they need certain physical. But hatred alone, animus, the Supreme Court's been like, that's not a constitutional basis for treating people differently. But if you look at what has happened this year, we have actually reversed that. We have made animus against a certain group of individuals, specifically kind of trans and gender diverse individuals. Animus is now the basis for policy. It's actually baked in. The first executive order that went down on Inauguration Day about, sexes, there's only two sexes, and everything else is, distorted gender ideology. We have now made dislike and disapproval of a group a fundamental basis of policy. That has not happened, in the modern era. And so we're in a different territory. And so I find it impossible not to at least acknowledge what is happening. We're at a different scale than we've ever been before. And I have no idea where it's going to turn out, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, I could talk to you for a long time, but I know that you have to get out of here because you are flying home today.
Get back in the classroom.
To get to the classroom. I love it. Now, just as we're finishing up here, I just want to just offer a reflection that, this skill to be empathic towards the other, especially if we understand that we are kind of locked in our algorithms to some extent, and to develop that, I really think, and you said it earlier, it might be the key to unlocking some of this, hopefully, and maybe
which means being in person.
That's true.
Empathy doesn't work as well online.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think we're better off. And now one of the things I sort of force my students to do is I pair them up and I sort of force them to spend time with one another, as part of their assignments. And then they make a little video documentary about one another. I'm like, the process of learning about another humans have been doing that forever.
Yeah.
It's like the oldest fossils you find for human footprints are basically footprints of two humans walking side by side. Humans have been walking together and talking together as long as humans have been on this planet. So let's get back in the habit of doing that, of looking at one another, listening, which means actually listening, not planning your own response while the other person is talking, like actual listening. I think we need to go back to training those skills, because that's another thing that technology has sort of trained them out, is everything is speeded up. We need to slow down. Those social empathic muscles are muscles. And it's really folks who are college age. I think that's our best chance to be like, let's slow down. Let's exercise those muscles a little bit more.
Well, I don't know. We might have to have a part 2 about you just talking about your teaching methods in classrooms someday. So maybe I'll reach out. But I really appreciate you taking this time. Thank you for sharing this. Where should people find you, find your work, your books?
I have found, courtesy of my mother, that if you type Lisa Diamond, Utah into Google, you'll find my faculty webpage. I guess I'm the only Lisa Diamond in Utah. So there's some links to my talks on there, and my email is on there. So Lisa Diamond, Utah, you'll be able to find me.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down, and thank you for all this good work you're doing.
Thanks a lot. This is fun.
Hey everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.